but Havlicek steals it. Havlicek stole the ball. Down goes Frazier. Down goes Frazier. Down goes Frazier.
United to Amici. Amici powers in.
Won their 6th NBA championship.
Gibson, swing. This is going to be a home run. Unbelievable. I don't believe what I just saw.
Hello, I'm Chris Fowler for Sports Century. On November 22nd, 1963, the Dallas Cowboys were in the 4th season of a difficult childhood when President Kennedy was assassinated, and they became the symbol of a city in national disgrace. Then, in 1966, they embarked on a run that raised them and their city from the ashes. In 20 years, they won 13 division titles, 5 NFC championships, and 2 Super Bowls. But when it was over, it was really over. After 3 straight losing seasons, America's team and its coach since birth, Tom Landry, were again on the Civic hot seat.
Texas Stadium in the heyday is a place to see and be seen. And by 1988, the place was half empty because people didn't want to associate with the Dallas Cowboys anymore. It was a debacle.
I was doing a radio call-in show, and people were calling by the scores, saying that Landry had to go. Landry had to be replaced. The game had passed him by. He was old. He was senile.
He was losing track and touch, not only with game situations, but he couldn't remember his players' names. It was very poignant and very sad.
The Dallas Cowboys were sold tonight to an Arkansas oil millionaire. The deal's first casualty, the Cowboys' legendary coach, Tom Landry.
In February of 1989, the ink was hardly dry in the $140 million deal for the team and the stadium when Jerry Jones summarily displaced Landry with an old friend, Jimmy Johnson, who had won the national title with the Miami Hurricanes in 1987.
This brash interloper was seen dining at one of Landry's favorite Mexican spots with Jimmy Johnson the night before the announcement, which was perceived as dancing on Landry's grave.
They never went to Tom before it and said, look, Coach, I'm buying this team. You're no longer going to be coaching here. I think he was deeply disappointed and deeply hurt.
I remember the sadness that there was in the Cowboys organization. Tom Landry had done so much. They had become America's team, and all of a sudden, the great ride was coming to an end.
Because Jerry was an outsider when he came to the NFL, he really didn't learn the accepted ways of doing things. The fact that you don't fire legendary coaches, you don't hire a college coach like Jimmy Johnson.
Jerry and Jimmy were both painted with the brush of these guys don't know what they're doing, and boy, are we going to take advantage of them.
Bucking conventional wisdom, Jones and Johnson raised eyebrows when they shipped off their 2-time Pro Bowl running back Herschel Walker to the Vikings for 5 players and 7 draft choices. One of those picks facilitated their acquiring Emmitt Smith.
I had 2 owners call me after I'd made the Herschel Walker trade. And they said, Jerry, you're new at this, and we know you don't know what you're doing.
Little did I know that the talent that we had at University of Miami was better than what the Cowboys had. We continually revolved the door until we found the talent that we wanted.
It wasn't so much that we had the picks as much as what we did with the picks, and we were able to draft some solid players. Jimmy was a tremendous evaluator of talent.
3 years in a row, the Cowboys drafted a receiver better than Drew Pearson, a quarterback better than Roger Staubach, and a running back better than Tony Dorsett. That's how they won.
In 1991, just 2 years after finishing 1-15, the revamped Cowboys were in the playoffs. The next season, they won their first Super Bowl in 15 years.
How about them Cowboys?
They were talented really at every position. I don't know that we really had a weakness on that team.
They could beat you running Emmitt. They could beat you throwing the ball to Michael. And you weren't going to get to Troy because he was too smart. He got the ball out too quick.
You had an offensive line that was second to none. You had a defense that I think was ahead of the curve in terms of being built on speed.
That was the youngest, deepest, fastest, strongest, most talented team I've seen.
If there were still any skeptics around the league, they were silenced in January of 1994 when the Cowboys won their second consecutive Super Bowl. With success came a new team swagger that reflected their freewheeling, high-living owner.
They just defined that era of football, not only with the wins and losses, but with the characters that they had.
We had some guys who could really perform, and they touted their stuff and stuck their chest out and strutted like peacocks.
The thing about them is they were arrogant, they talked trash, but they backed it up.
They wanted to become America's team and stay America's team, but they also wanted to be bad boys.
To be a Dallas Cowboy when the team is winning is to be the Lord of the Manor.
Being a Dallas Cowboy at that time was like probably being Tom Cruise in Hollywood. You were it.
We would get 8,000 people at our practice. I mean, our summer practices, and most of the women came out there with no underwear on.
In the case of Irvin and Emmett, they tell the story about going to nightclubs, and the two of them would go and dance inside the glass DJ booth, because if they got out of the DJ booth, they'd get hurt. They'd get hurt by women.
They were the king of the NFL. They were surrounded by sex, drugs, rock and roll, and power.
You have that mentality of invincibility. We can do when we want to do, we can do how we want to do. So, you know, you name it, we partook in it.
They were very brash and very arrogant in the way they lived their lives, and it caught up with them.
What produced the magic of the Cowboys was the dynamic tension between a Jerry Jones and a Jimmy Johnson. They both needed each other.
Jimmy and Jerry, as potent and as wonderful and as dynamic as it wasn't going to last for a very long time.
It was just unfortunate they couldn't keep the marriage vows going between the two of them.
Behind the glory, resentments brewed.
Back at the NFL draft, the Dallas Cowboys up with their second first-round selection.
Jerry says to Jimmy, when the cameras come on, act like you're talking to me so that people will think I'm involved.
Jimmy Johnson complied. At the same time, he was upset that somebody would want credit for something that he didn't deserve, and so he went out of his way to mock Jerry Jones.
Wanstead came into Jimmy's office about 5 minutes before the draft. He said, "Hey, come on, let's go, we're starting." And Jimmy said to Wanstead, "Jerry thinks he's so smart, let him run the draft."
Once we started winning games, the more success you have, the more each individual feels like they need more of a share of the accolades.
Jerry wanted more coaching responsibility, and Jimmy wanted him to have none.
I don't think it's any secret in my life that had I not been a little greedy and wanted to make more money than I thought coaches could make, I would have coached.
I can remember being in Jerry Jones' offices, and all of a sudden, he takes out a napkin and starts drawing the protection plans for that week for Troy Aikman. And I'm watching him draw these X's and O's, and I just looked at him and said, "Jerry, what are you doing?"
Jerry would pull you off to the side if you were a beat writer and say, "You know, I really made that Charles Haley trade." It was just this constant quest for credit and legitimacy.
In March of 1994, the friction generated by the owner and coach produced more than smoke in a hotel bar in Orlando, Florida, during the annual NFL owners' meetings.
Jerry walked up and toasted the Cowboys, and not everyone toasted him back. When Jerry realized the snub, he walked off in a huff.
That night, he was adamant about one point, and that's that he was going to fire Jimmy Johnson, which seemed inconceivable.
He said that 500 coaches could have done what Jimmy did. And I think Jerry was trying to convince himself in his mind that it was the right thing to do.
Jerry made a few comments in the wee hours of the morning after a night of partying that didn't sit well with me, and I said, "Hey, you know, why wait? Now it's time to go."
We have mutually decided that I would no longer be the head football coach with the Dallas Cowboys.
When I sensed after 5 years that he was not long for the job, then that made me have to do things differently.
Who ever heard of a coach being fired or run off by the owner after winning 2 consecutive Super Bowls?
With Johnson gone, Jones hired a former college coach with a past. Despite winning 3 national championships with Oklahoma, Barry Switzer stepped down in 1989 when charges, including rape, gun possession, and drug possession, were brought against several of his players. After 5 years in exile, Switzer was fired up.
We got a job to do, and we're gonna do it, baby!
The Switzer hire was nothing but an ego. That was Jerry saying, I'm going to take the least likely guy that anybody would think about, and I'm going to win a Super Bowl with him.
After losing to the 49ers in the 1994 NFC title game, Jones went shopping for redemption and found it in the free agent market. In September of 1995, he signed defensive back Deion Sanders to a $35 million 7-year deal. 4 months later, the Cowboys won still another Super Bowl, this time under Switzer.
Some will say the reason that they were able to at least win another Super Bowl is the fact that Barry Switzer did not grind on this team.
Switzer allowed us to be more comfortable. He relaxed us, and it was good because a lot of us were beat up by the time Coach Johnson left. Dudes were sore.
He was the perfect coach because he had no ego. He was not going to make changes to make it his team.
It's like a new car. I mean, you don't fix it unless something's wrong with it. When he got there, it was a Ferrari. So why go change the parts when it's the fastest car on the track?
But there was a downside to Switzer's benign neglect.
I think Barry Switzer came in and did what he thought was the right thing. But I think in an attempt not to screw it up, then you lose sight of what it was that made us great. We began to self-destruct.
The players actually ran that team at that point. We had a figurehead who was Barry Switzer.
They knew when Barry Switzer was their coach that they could get away with whatever they wanted to get away with.
Barry got stopped at an airport with a gun. You have to lead by example, and Barry wasn't a good example.
Barry'd be late to his own meetings. I mean, it was crazy. There'd be days Barry was the first one to leave Valley Ranch after practice.
He began to skip team meetings the night before games on Saturday, almost right away.
My son played football in Arkansas, and I flew around the country on Saturday afternoon to see my son play. Players didn't care, give one rat's about that.
If he thinks that his presence at mandatory team meetings is irrelevant, then maybe Barry was irrelevant.
At the Cowboys training camp in the summer of 1995, Switzer and quarterback Troy Aikman aired their differences when a number of players arrived at practice hungover from a late-night party.
Aikman was just absolutely livid. And Switzer goes up to Aikman and says, well, what is it you expect me to do? I mean, Irvin led the party. You want me to cut Michael Irvin? And Aikman's answer was, no, you don't cut Michael Irvin, but you cut that guy and you cut that guy to send a message to the rest of them. And then you run Michael Irvin until he's throwing up in the grass. And instead, Barry Switzer started practice. About 10 minutes later, he blew his whistle because everybody was too sick to practice and said, hell, boys, let's just call it a day.
Troy had no respect for Barry as a leader of men. He felt that Barry let the team run itself.
Troy has his ideas about how certain things ought to be done. Well, that's how he feels about it. I wanted to approach it a different way. Both ways work. He got the Super Bowl doing it one way, and he got the Super Bowl doing it my way.
Although the hard route and the soft route had reached the promised land, the Cowboys were about to run out of road in the fast lane. In 1997, 2 seasons after winning their 3rd Super Bowl in 4 years, the Dallas Cowboys went 6-10. 3 weeks later, Barry Switzer resigned.
I think we began to self-destruct from our own passions and success.
The team began to creep away from that chemistry, began to lose that sense of discipline.
Hey, you girls ever try a quarterback sandwich?
Sounds good to me.
This is like North Dallas 40, the movie we saw in the 70s. When this team is good, everything is done loudly, with a brash, arrogant swagger.
Your job was to deliver on Sunday, and if you delivered on Sunday, you could pretty much do what you wanted the rest of the week.
We partied hard on and off the field. We play on Sundays, and we partied from Monday till it was game time.
The strip houses that are famous in Dallas were also the scene of numerous incidents where Cowboys players were involved, and sometimes they were hustled out before the police could get to the scene.
There were so many off-the-field incidents, I felt like a crime reporter rather than a sports reporter.
Michael Irvin, the Dallas Cowboys' all-time leading receiver, has been indicted on 2 counts of drug possession.
Michael, I think, was consumed by some of his passions, but I never met a player that worked harder than Michael Irvin.
He was the Pied Piper.
and he did lead by example on the field. Unfortunately, he was a Pied Piper off the field.
We were young and we were dumb. You know, we did a lot of young, dumb things. Instead of discerning what's good and what's bad, you partake in it all. You know, women, drinking, partying, everything.
Irvin's high life made national headlines in March of 1996 when Dallas police found him and former teammate Alfredo Roberts sharing a hotel room with 2 exotic dancers and 2.1 ounces of cocaine. Irvin was charged with drug possession, a second-degree felony.
Michael said when the police knocked on his door, "Do you know who I am?" Meaning, I'm Michael Irvin, I'm a cowboy, I can do whatever I want, why are you guys bothering me?
He's obviously the epitome of the Cowboys' success in the 90s. Who else would walk into a courthouse with a mink coat on and sunglasses and say, "If you want a show, I'll give you a show"?
Irvin's legal troubles took a bizarre turn when Dallas police officer Johnny Hernandez, a boyfriend of another exotic dancer whom the star receiver partied with, was arrested for attempting to take out a contract on Irvin's life.
This is like a movie gone bad, and I don't know when will somebody just say, "Take 2, let's stop this scene," or "cut."
What that did is point out how deep into almost an underworld Michael Irvin had fallen.
He didn't necessarily think that his problem was drugs, but that his problems were women. He was addicted to women. He was addicted to sex.
The first extended interview I ever had with Michael Irvin, we went to a strip joint, and Michael says to me, "This is my office."
The night that he was indicted, he came back to the Cowboy facility to work out. He stripped down and stood there and just marveled at his own body and said, "You know, this body deserves beautiful naked women, and it's always going to have beautiful naked women. I don't care what they do to me."
America's team took another national hit when it was revealed that some players had leased a house for activities not meant for the average home.
It was called the White House because among the players it was known for a place to go and do some recreational cocaine.
I heard about it. A lot of drugs, a lot of women.
It was drinking, probably drugging, and wild sex parties with a whole bunch of players and a whole bunch of women.
It was a house that we all got together and decided to get, thinking that there's no use of us continue to go in and out of hotels and all this. Let's get an extra house. If any extracurricular activities were to go on, let's make sure they go on at this house to make sure that we can all keep it quiet.
Michael said it the best when I asked him, how could we? And he said we were trying to do the wrong thing right. We're trying to have a place that they could be together, socialize, and yet at the same time not be out in the public.
The house was right there behind the coaching towers.
Right across the street from the practice field, and they had the guy that cut the field cut their lawn. Now don't tell me that the management and the coaches didn't know that was going on.
I don't babysit them. I don't leave the locker room with them. I don't go out to clubs with them. I don't know where they socialize. A lot of times we're the last persons to know about it.
They didn't care to know. They said specifically at times they didn't want to know. Drug use didn't bother them. Suspensions bothered them.
Am I responsible for a 33-year-old guy that's married, got 4 kids, that he goes out and creates a felony that affects us all? Well, hell no, I'm not.
It was as if when Switzer came here, he brought a truckload of drugs and whores with him. The problem was there all along. Jimmy did a good job keeping a lid on it.
Defensive tackle Leon Lett and corner Clayton Holmes, according to Chris Mortenson's sources, both were banned for 4 weeks. Both have violated the league's anti-substance abuse policy for a second time.
Drug use on this team was not isolated. There were a bunch of guys taking drugs.
In a year-and-a-half or 2-year period, the league handed out 13 suspensions for violation of the substance abuse policy, and 7 of them came to the Cowboys.
I wouldn't say the team had a drug problem, but I would say that there were certain individuals that made poor choices.
Did we have a drug problem? I'd be a fool if I stood here and said we didn't, because almost every situation we had with the Dallas Cowboys where players were involved was drug-related.
The fallout from the Cowboys' heady ride was severe for some former players. In 1999, Mark Tuanay died of a heroin overdose. In 2001, Sherman Williams was sentenced to 15 years for trafficking drugs and counterfeiting. And in 2002, Six-time Pro Bowler Nate Newton was sentenced to more than 5 years for possession of almost 400 pounds of marijuana.
When the championship stopped, the large living they were doing finally caught up with them. A lot of these people weren't grown men. They were overgrown young men who simply couldn't handle the success.
During Barry Switzer's tenure as head coach, Dallas owner Jerry Jones frequently appeared on the sidelines and in the meeting rooms. But many who follow the Cowboys closely believe his mismanagement of the salary cap and poor draft decisions were wrecking the team.
Starting in 1995 and continuing through 2001, I think you can make a very, very strong case for this being the worst drafting team in the entire National Football League.
We were prepared to win for 10 years, but salary cap, free agency, screwed the whole thing up.
All of a sudden, within 3 years, we all started getting hurt. And we left money on the cap that really tied his hands to be aggressive and to do the things he needed to do to keep the Cowboys competitive.
The number one reason is injury. Dion's injuries, Jay Novacek's injuries, Charles Haley's injuries, just as Troy Aikman's health. All of those things were tough luck for the Cowboys.
Under Jones' third coach, Chan Gailey, the Cowboys reached the playoffs in 1998 and 1999. But that wasn't good enough. Jones fired Gailey and replaced him with Dave Campo. Over the next 3 years, the Cowboys went 15-33, including a humiliating loss to the expansion Houston Texans in the 2002 opener. Jerry Jones' Cowboys were undeniably in freefall.
His boys were turning into laughingstocks. Nobody feared the Cowboys anymore.
We had some diamonds, but we had a lot of cow poo-poo around it. And the diamonds was mixed in with the poo-poo. It just all looked like poo-poo.
Remember it for what it was. Remember what wreckage and what no self-discipline and what the right people not being in charge. Let that serve as a lesson of what can happen to even the most talented kind of team.
With a whole lot of egg on his face, Jones fired Campo and sought a strong man with deep NFL experience. Two-time Super Bowl winner Bill Parcells signed a $17.1 million four-year contract with Dallas. His mandate was clear: pick up the pieces.
I think it was an act of desperation because they kind of hit rock bottom.
I think more than anything else, the embarrassment of the last 3 or 4 years and the talent level going down so far and the discipline level going down so far, he needed to do something drastic. And he needed to go out and try to get the very best, even though it might mean giving up a little bit of the spotlight.
After a vigorous training camp and preseason, a regenerated Dallas team broke into the 2003 season with a new spirit, tougher, faster, and decidedly more focused. By mid-season, its 6 victories were more than in any of the previous 3 seasons. Finishing at 10-6, the club earned a wild card berth in the playoffs, and Jerry Jones couldn't say enough.